Welcome to Blue Nile. We hope you are enjoying solving past questions with us. Let's take a look at a big question. We are going to look at a question called trombone. This question comes from the June 2014 exam and is for 30 marks. As there are a lot of marks up for grabs, this question does cover several syllabus areas. Included are the following: the payroll system deficiencies, controls, and test of controls, interim and final audits, substantive audit procedures for the payroll balance, and substantive audit procedures for accruals. You must be careful with timing in this exam, especially with a question of this size and with the volume of information you must read through in the scenario. Therefore, aim for spending 1.8 minutes for every mark. This question should take no more than 54 minutes. To successfully complete this question, you will need to plan your answer, taking care with the time allocated to each part of the question. Use the scenario where needed, and have a clear and efficient communication. It may be worth pausing the video at this point and printing off the exam question. That way you can follow the scenario as we talk through it. As with any question containing a scenario, it is important to plan the answer and use the information that have been provided. Reading the requirements before the scenario is important, so that you can then identify what is needed in the scenario faster. This is crucial given the time you have in the exam. Let's now break down the requirements. Part A is split into 3 sub-requirements. It refers to the payroll system in the scenario and asks for the following information. Part 1. Identify and explain 5 deficiencies in the payroll system. Part 2. Recommend for a control to address each deficiency. And Part 3. Describe a test of control the auditor should perform to address if each of these controls are operating. To answer this question, careful study of the scenario is required. All deficiencies are in the scenario. You have to find them, explain why they are a deficiency, recommend a control, and create a valid control test to assess. This is a 15-mark question, so 5 marks per sub-requirement. Part B requires you to explain the difference between an interim and final audit. This is a knowledge question with no real connection to the scenario. It is for 5 marks and is very much a you either know it or you don't question from your studies. Part C requires you to describe substantive audit procedures you should perform at the final audit to confirm the completeness and accuracy of trombone's payroll expense. This is for 6 marks. It requires 6 substantive audit procedures for 4 marks. This should be designed with the information in the scenario in mind, as only procedures relevant to trombone will be permitted. Part D asks to describe audit procedures that would be required in respect of the year-end accrual for tax payable on employment. This again requires you to provide substantive audit procedures, this time for a liability balance. This is for 4 marks, so 4 procedures needed and relevant to trombone. Let us now start to structure our answers for each requirement. Part A. We have 3 sub-requirements, Part 1, 2, and 3. Each requirement is linked to the other, and therefore your answer script should ideally present these requirements together. It is best to present your answer by setting up 3 columns, clearly heading each column, deficiency, control, and test of control, making reference to the question number. In Part 1, you will get half a mark for identifying the deficiency in the scenario. To get the remaining half a mark, you will need to explain in your own words why it is a deficiency for trombone. For Part 2, you will be awarded a whole mark for an appropriate control to address the deficiency. Part 3 is the more challenging element of this question. You will get a mark if your control test is clear, able to assess the control you have recommended, and with sufficient detail. All of the deficiencies can be found in the scenario. As you scan the scenario detail, you should make note of the issues you feel are relevant. Underline, highlight, and make notes all over the scenario so you are forming a plan of your detailed answer. This will help you with time management. The trick is then to select 5 deficiencies that you find most comfortable writing about. There are many deficiencies detailed, and with thorough revision of past exam questions, you will see similar issues pop up. You will therefore already feel confident that you can give a strong answer with some of the deficiencies included. Reference them on the question paper so you can see them quickly when you come to write up your answer. If at this point you are struggling to identify many deficiencies, it may indicate a lack of preparation in this area. It may be worth going back to your study notes and reviewing internal control systems and deficiencies again before continuing with this video. The 5 deficiencies I have selected are: the automated calculations in the payroll system for gross pay, net pay, and deductions are not checked. Overtime pay is only authorized above 30% of standard hours. Overtime taken as days in lieu is not checked back to the overtime worked report by payroll clerks. The overtime worked report is sent to the department heads that they only have to respond if they find an error. And the finance director reviews the total bank transfers for pay with the total on the payroll records. As these have been identified from the scenario, the next step is to explain why they are a deficiency and suggest a control to improve the system. Once we have this in place, then we could design a test of control that will assess the recommended control. The first deficiency is that automated calculations are not checked. The scenario tells us that clerks enter details from the overtime worksheets onto the system, which then automatically calculates the pay. However, the calculations are not checked at all. If the system incurred errors, these would not be identified. This could lead to the payroll figures within the financial statements to be over or understated. The recommendation would be to ensure someone within the payroll department, preferably senior, regularly selects a sample of employees and recalculates their pay. Agreeing to the actual calculation throughout the year would help identify potential errors on the system. To test this control, the auditor must design a clear control audit procedure to carry out on what we have just recommended. It does not need to be particularly complex. Ideally, it should be quick and a sensible way to test the control. We could suggest that the auditor selects a sample of these manual recalculations performed by the payroll staff to assess whether these have been carried out. They should identify who did the recalculation, identifying whether there is an employee's signature and date. Please remember at this point the difference between a control test and a substantive test. A control test's aim is to identify if the control within a system is effective. The aim of a substantive test is to identify if there is a material misstatement within the balance or transaction in the financial statements. For part 3, we only need to see if the control recommendation is actually happening within a system. The next deficiency is that overtime paid is only authorized by department heads if it exceeds 30%. The overtime payments throughout the year below 30% could collectively be a material sum. There is a risk that employees will claim for hours not worked which will go undetected. This will cause additional payroll costs. The recommendation should be that weekly overtime sheets are authorized and signed by department heads before being processed by the payroll department. This way, all overtime will be reviewed by a senior official and reduce the temptation for employees to inflate wages. A test of control would be for the auditor to select a sample of employee weekly overtime sheets and inspect for evidence of authorization. The auditor would expect a department head's signature and date of authorization. Overtime taken as days in lieu is not always checked back to the overtime worked report by the payroll clerk. This could lead to time being taken off by employees when they did not work the overtime. The recommended control should be that the payroll clerk must always review the overtime sheets before authorizing time off in lieu. They should show evidence of review, for example, a signature, and date to enforce the control. The test of control the auditor can carry out would then be to select a sample of employee overtime sheets, where time has been taken off, and inspect for evidence of review, for example, the payroll clerk's signature. Our fourth deficiency lies with the department heads, who only have to respond to the payroll department regarding the overtime worked report if there are errors recorded. This does not indicate that every report has been reviewed, as they may not respond because they've not reviewed it. The recommended control should be that the department heads must respond by email on a timely basis to the payroll department, that they approve of the overtime report before it is then used to process payments. A test of control for the auditor to carry out would be for a sample of reports emailed to the department heads. Agree there has been a response, and any issues have been followed up by the payroll department. Finally, the fifth deficiency we have selected is that the finance director only reviews the total list of bank transfers, comparing to the total amount paid to employees as per the payroll records. There could be fake or ghost employees included, or employees missed which may not have been considered. The recommended improvement in control should be that the finance director should carry out checks on a sample of employees each time to reduce the risk of missing error or fraud. The auditor could then review a sample of payment lists for evidence of the finance director's review to ensure this control is being carried out. All 5 deficiencies have now been presented, explaining clearly the reason why there are deficiency in controls, the recommendation, and the test of control. The next step is to now move on to Part B. Part B requires us to explain the difference between an interim and a final audit. It is for 5 marks, and therefore requires 5 points. The marking scheme also states that a maximum of 3 marks will be given for each type of audit, so you are required to even out your points. This covers the planning area of your studies and looks at how the timing of an audit is important to consider. The auditor must ensure the final audit report and its opinion can be presented in time to the shareholders. Presentation is again important for this question. Clearly show which type of audit you're writing about. Headings to introduce your answer are strongly recommended. A well-prepared candidate will be able to answer this part of the question with ease or difficulty. This is a knowledge question with no need to apply the information you know to the scenario. Points you could raise about an interim audit include the following. Interim audits will take place before the year end. Their key aim is to allow more time to carry out the audit work and reduce time pressure during the audit. The work that can be carried out in an interim includes the assessment of current control systems. They can test controls and assess for deficiencies as they are at a client during the year of the audit. Planning work and substantive audit procedures on the statement of profit and loss balances can also be carried out. An interim audit is not compulsory. It will depend on the type of client, for example, its size and complexity. Points you can raise about a final audit include the following. The final audit will take place after the year end, once a draft set of financial statements is available. The audit would include a follow-up of any issues raised at the interim audit, analytical procedures to identify significant balances, substantive testing of account balances and transactions, completion and review work, including subsequent event review and going concern review. The outcome of the final audit will be the preparation of the audit report and the formation of the independent audit opinion on the financial statements. To summarize, selecting 3 from one audit and 2 from the other audit will gain maximum marks. Presenting your answer clearly with headings will assist the marker in awarding you marks for the points you have raised. The remainder of this question focuses on the design of substantive audit procedures. This area continues to be a weakness for many candidates. This is largely due to it being a very practical area of the external audit. If you've never been an auditor, it's very difficult to picture what they would do to test the balances and transactions of a company for material misstatements. Remember the auditor's approach to substantive testing. For each balance, decide which are the key objectives of the test, so which financial statement assertions are most important for this balance. Consider the quality of the evidence available. Remember they need sufficient appropriate evidence. Consider the methods they will use to test. Select from analytical procedures, inquiry, inspection, observation, recalculation, confirmation, and reperformance. Design the test, making sure it is a clear instruction, explaining what needs to be done and why. Perform the test, and then decide if further work is required. To get maximum marks, your substantive test must be detailed enough, explaining how to do the work and why. Many candidates do not provide enough detail and lose valuable marks. Set out each test, leaving spaces between each one, so it is clear to the marker where one test ends and the other begins. Let's now look at Part C. This requirement asks for substantive audit procedures you would perform at the final audit to confirm the completeness and accuracy of Trombone's payroll expense. It is for 6 marks, and therefore we need 6 substantive audit procedures. As we are looking at a balance in the statement of profit and loss, and we are at the final audit, a really useful method to generate some marks is to use analytical procedures. Remember that this method is very effective for the auditor to identify anything unusual that could be investigated further. It is therefore very good when testing for fraud. 3 good substantive audit procedures for payroll are as follows. The auditor should compare the payroll balances in the current year's financial statements to the previous year and investigate any significant differences. The auditor should also inspect the monthly payroll reports and compare the monthly charges to the charges in last year's report and the budget or forecast for the year. Any significant differences should also be investigated. They should also perform a proof in total of the wages and salaries for the year, obtaining information on joiners, leavers, pay increases and bonuses. This should be compared to the actual amounts included in the financial statements and any material differences investigated. In addition to these analytical audit procedures, the auditor should perform other substantive procedures to help identify any material misstatements and confirm accuracy and completeness of the balance. They should agree the payroll expense in the payroll system at the year-end to the trial balance and financial statements, investigating any differences. They should also select a sample of employees from the payroll system and recalculate their gross and net pay, comparing to the payroll records for accuracy. As a final procedure, for a sample of weekly overtime sheets, document the overtime and agree to the payroll records. There are several other substantive procedures that could be carried out, and a full review of the exam suggested answer on the ACCA website is recommended to generate other ideas. However, each procedure has been written as a clear, yet detailed instruction to gain the marks. Use the scenario wherever possible when designing these tests. If you ignore the detail regarding the company, you may design a test that has no relevance and may not be possible to carry out. The final requirement, Part D, requires you to describe the audit procedures required in respect of the year-end accrual for tax payable on employment. It tells us in additional information that Trombone deducts tax from employees monthly and then pays to the tax authorities in the following month. The accrual is therefore the amount payable to the authorities for the month of August. We must design 4 audit procedures to get the 4 marks available. This focuses on the liabilities area in the statement of financial position. The assertions to focus on are usually completeness, accuracy, existence, and rights and obligations for liabilities. With this in mind, we now need to consider what evidence we would have available. The payroll system, the payroll reports, tax correspondence, and bank statements. We should try wherever possible to obtain third-party evidence, and therefore design tests using these pieces of evidence. My 4 audit procedures would be: agree the year-end accrual in the financial statements to the post-year-end bank statements to verify they have been paid and it is for the agreed amount. Agree the year-end accrual in the financial statements to the payroll records to verify accuracy. Recalculate the accrual using the payroll records to confirm accuracy. And inspect correspondence the client has from the tax authorities to identify any evidence of outstanding amounts. Once these tests are completed, if everything reviewed agrees, the auditor will feel satisfied that the accruals balance is free from material misstatement. This 30-mark question has covered some key areas of the audit and assurance syllabus. Please remember, to be successful in this type of question, we need to plan the approach and ensure we have identified how long is needed for each part. Use headings to introduce your answers and space out your points so it is clear for the marker where the marks can be allocated. Finally, if there is a scenario, use it. This information was given to you for a reason, and at F8 they are trying to see if you can apply your knowledge to a given scenario and not just be able to remember the facts. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and good luck.